So we'll start with those. And then as we introduce, there are 3 main topics that we'll be talking about. And as those topics are introduced, if you have questions, I ask that you raise your hand, and we'll have 2 mic runners that'll come, and you will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So please feel free to do that. Also, I know you are all professional and you are all respectful, and that's the way to handle this today. There is a lot of passion about this, but the whole purpose is to communicate and clarify. So without further ado, I'm going to have our lovely panel introduce themselves, and we'll get started. Dee Dee, would you like to start?
Sure. Dee Dee Crossett. I'm the Dean of the San Francisco Institute of Aesthetics and Cosmetology. I'm a licensed esthetician. I own a skin studio in San Francisco called Skin on Market, and former president of the board, and on the board a little over 5 years. I'm retired, is what they say when you left the board.
I'm Christy Underwood, and I am the executive officer of the board.
Tammy Guess, and I am the board policy analyst.
Marcy Maliza, and I'm the outreach coordinator.
All right, thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause for being here today. So the first item that we wanted to talk about was the Master Aesthetics License. For those of you who know or don't know, it has been pulled from legislature on Thursday, but I know that there may be some questions out there regarding its future or anything like that. So if anybody has any questions about Master Aesthetics and its current state, please raise your hand at this point. Okay. Here she comes. Go ahead and stand up, please.
Oh, I thought somebody back there was coming. I was waiting my turn. I'm sorry. Don't mean to be rude. Hi, I'm Diane Bucola. Just a quick question about the master. I got the letter from the website and all that. Just a quick question. Is there any way at all that that would be moved forward in 2014? Or are we guaranteed it's dead for now?
The bill itself, AB 1153, has been pulled, so there wouldn't be enough time for it to go any further in that form. So it would have to be reintroduced in the next legislative session, which is certainly a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a question over here. Please stand up and state your name.
Hi, my name is Lisa Parrott, and my question is, I've read all the information, but why was it pulled? A precise detail.
Have you ever watched that show, House of Cards?
No, I have not.
I feel like it's a little bit like that show. I think that if we were going to do it again, if I was going to do the, what's it called, Monday quarterbacking, use a sports term, but there wasn't enough, we didn't have enough of us showing up. And I think people forget that the Board of Barbering Cosmetology falls under the Department of Consumer Affairs, which means their main concern is the health and wellness of the consumer. They license us as skincare therapists and estheticians and cosmetologists and barbers and electrologists, and nail technicians. That's who they license. But the reason they license us is for the health and wellness of the consumer, and they want to make sure that we're not spreading disease or causing harm. It's like the fastest way that I can kind of describe it. Also, there's some, and Rebecca brought this, Gabrielle brought this up earlier today, is the 13th licensed esthetician in the state of California. That was 1977. So, you know, our license is pretty young, and we fell under cosmetology. It's young in this scheme of licensure, but think about what was happening in 1977 in aesthetics at a 600-hour program versus what's happening now. And we really, back then, didn't define it to what it is today, and there was no way to predict that. So the idea behind the Master Aesthetics License was that 600 hours allows us to just do this much stuff. We can go from here to here. We can, I think they use terms that, as skincare therapists, we don't like: beautify, massage, we can wax, do lashes. It's the basic stuff that you learned in beauty school, and you're like, that's so not what I do. Those are the basic things that fall under a 600-hour license, because as a full-time student, you're in school for 17 weeks. So everybody says, well, let's just make this license bigger. It's not enough time. And somebody mentioned Sedesco earlier. Well, Sedesco doesn't really, not that it doesn't count, but it doesn't mean anything in California, because we have a 600-hour program, and a true Sedesco esthetician, let's say, is doing 2 years in Europe, and they're doing aromatherapy, and they can do manicures and pedicures, and they do posture alignment and stuff that you don't practice as an esthetician in California. And we weren't able to just take that and jack it up and make it bigger, because our cosmetologists in our state, who were the first licensed people to do facials in our state, they are licensed as estheticians. And it doesn't matter what you want to say. You're like, well, I think I'm better, and I've seen hairdressers do facials and they can't do facials, whatever. I met a cosmetologist today, and she's very passionate about skincare. So they are licensed to do the basic craft of a 600-hour esthetician. We came from underneath that. So when you take a 600-hour program and you say, let's just make it bigger, you've got another licensed group of people, every single licensed cosmetologist that's also licensed to do those same things. So it's not as easy to just take it and make it double, because then what do you do with the cosmetologist? So the idea was, well, if we come up with a master aesthetics license, the cosmos stay the same, 600 hours stay the same. There was a built-in grandfather clause for those of us that have been around for a while, and we're like, wait a second, I feel like I fall into this. And then we're going to move into this master aesthetics license. I think it fell for a couple reasons. It takes money, and the Aesthetics Coalition that was pushing that forward, there were a lot of people that said they wanted it, but nobody was putting in any money to move it forward, and you have to pay lobbyists. It is really like the House of Cards. In a very small, you imagine, like, come on, it's just a master aesthetics license. You have to have another person, there representing your bill or your cause. So that was one of them. We also had some backfire from people in our own estheticians that I don't think they really understood why it was a good thing for us. So I think the next time around, it's getting everybody to hear all of the information so that we're all on the same page. I think people took it as, oh, they're trying to take away what I already can do. And in fact, we weren't doing that at all. Your main 600 hours was staying the same. We were adding in services that currently is outside the scope of practice or is not currently defined in 600 hours, like treating the entire body. And many of you are like, well, I already treat hyperkeratosis or keratosis pilaris in the back of the arms, and I already treat back acne, or I already do these things, or I'm doing body massages and wraps. You may, but if you look at the current 600-hour scope of practice, that's not included in our 600 hours. So we were trying to get something in there so that it was included. And it's dead this time around, but if we do bring it back up, we would need everyone's support in it. And I think, all those things can change around, but the grandfather portion of that was, if you've been in the industry X amount of years, then you're grandfathered into this zone, because based on your experience level, and if you've been practicing as an esthetician, chances are to be in this industry for as long as you have, what you're doing, and we don't need to have you go back to school for that. But moving forward, someone could go to school for 600 hours and just stick with that. Right off the bat, they could go for 12, or they could do 600 and then come back at a later time and do the second 600. That also would have opened it up for a cosmetologist that's practicing as an esthetician that wanted to add the 600. So that's kind of the history behind it. It started to turn into a certificate. That didn't go so well because there's no way in our current legislation for the board to regulate a certificate, because we don't have that program. So it just recently happened. I think it was this past Monday that the actual bill went away. But I would encourage you to follow the board on Twitter and on Facebook. And there is an aesthetics coalition. And when you hear these things, try to find the information and make sure that we all get it right. Because a lot of times when the language is being updated, I was on the board for 5 years, like I said, and a lot of the things that we're working on right now in legislation are good for us. We want things to be defined in regulation so that when there is an inspection, you're actually protected, because the way that regulation works is if you're doing something that's not listed or it's not mentioned, then you're kind of working outside of scope. That's why we're trying to make sure that we update the terms like LED and microcurrents. And I'll give you a basic small example of why legislation is sometimes very frustrating. Many people called the board and said, well, this lady's threading and she's doing eyebrows down the street in her garage. She can't do that because I have a license and she doesn't. Well, originally when we talked about our original regulation, when it talked about waxing or hair removal, we defined what waxing or hair removal was. We said, well, when you remove hair, you either wax, use a depilatory, or you tweeze. We took the time to define it so specifically that when people started threading, we hadn't mentioned threading as a way to remove hair. So we had no way to stop someone that was threading in a garage and trimming brows and grooming brows. And people were like, well, wait a second. She's doing brow arching. That's under my license. Well, threading's not, because we almost defined it too much. So one of the things that we did on the board was trying to make sure that we said, we remove hair, such as, could be like, and we tried to define it, but as new technology comes up, we want to make sure that that still falls under us and you can add in, like lash extensions, for example. You as an esthetician can do lash extensions. When that licensure was first written, people were doing false lashes, just little individuals or strips. Well, now there's lash extensions, and you can do that. But if we had, unfortunately, if we had made it so detail-oriented that we were like, you can take glue and one little lash and put it on a face, then we would have lost our, that would have fallen outside of practice for us. So sometimes it's very tricky, and the most important thing is to stay really active and involved and ask questions. And I think when there's change, we assume that it's bad, where sometimes it might be good, and it's great to get all of the information, because I think this master esthetician license with women are very powerful. The amount of money that we can raise when we put our mind to something is unbelievable. You know, I see my students raise $1,000 in a day wearing jeans. I'm like, what are you doing? You know, for some cause. But when we don't get the information, we can also be as detrimental. So this next time around, if we do get an opportunity to bring it back up, it will take all of us to come together, understand all the information, and it takes money to pay people.
But
Okay,
not me.
so
You don't pay her. Yes, she does not take, no. Like in terms of an outside coalition, because the board can't push bills through. It has to be an outside group with a paid lobbyist. That's what ends up pushing a bill through. When I was on the board, I couldn't participate with that coalition. Now that I'm off of the board, I can participate in the coalition.
okay, so with that said, we have to, as estheticians, join these coalitions to keep our voice and come together more, right? And have a lot more information and go on to the websites and read, like I've been doing. But also, I've also heard that they're going to take acne treatments out of our license. That's not happening.
No, we're
Okay.
going to touch on that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, we need to come together and join these coalitions to get our name, our profession heard, and keep our license, and then going forward with a master esthetician certificate, so that we can all do what we need to do, or move on with that, right?
Or if you want to take on more education, you can do that as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
I think if you look at a group, whether it's not the state board or also with like associate skincare professionals or another professional group like that outside the state board, it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on. I still have students that call me, or I know that there's product vendors. Everybody calls their product vendor, and then their product vendor ends up calling the board. But find where that resource is and try to pick I would try to pick a group that's really out for the betterment of the industry, that's not necessarily selling something, because they may have an ulterior motive. But whether it's associate skincare professionals or something like that, and also join the board so you're getting both viewpoints too.
And just to touch on one more thing, when the bill first came to the board did support it. The board removed their support position at our last board meeting because we weren't thrilled with the changes that had been made, and we couldn't enforce it and didn't see it going to make anything better. But we do post that on our meetings. However, just so you all know, and we've been talking about this for a couple years now, if not longer, and one of the board's main concern, and this is from all members of the board, is not to impact any existing estheticians or cosmetologists who happen to do skincare. So that was the one thing that we really focused on. And the last version of this bill had estheticians only performing services on the stratum corneum. That's it. So somehow it got mixed up, and we don't know, things happen. To limit estheticians extremely, and so that was the board never supported that. We'll be talking more about some of the regulation changes that the board is making, which we
want to strengthen the esthetician license for the practices that you already do. So the board, I just wanted to make it clear that the board definitely wanted to make sure that your existing scope of practice did not get touched. And the supporters of the bill as well, Dee Dee as well, everybody agreed with that, but unfortunately just didn't end up that way.
Which is why we decided to pull it and didn't have it keep going forward.
All right.
Hi. We raised $150,000 in the mid-90s at a trade show to help preserve the state board when the government wanted to sunset the board. We lost it because it was traded out for a gun bill at the very last minute with Governor Pete Wilson. Anyway, that's a long time ago, but my point is that if we are sincere about having this master bill, then we need to stand behind it with our money. And the way we raised that money was we had a can that said donate here. You can put in checks, you can put in cash. You go to the vendors and you ask them to put their money where their mouth is, or else they're not going to have people using their products in the state of California. There are also things that you can do in your own salons to have a jar. So I don't think we're there yet, but we need to get organized. I don't mind helping, but I don't know how to start it. We started the Barbering and Cosmetology Legislative Alliance in 1995 to save the board. It looks like we need to do something else. And where the money goes is not into their pockets. Where the money goes is to pay for the best lobbyists that you can, to get people into the state legislators' offices to explain why the bill is important, to do days with them where we put on beauty events. They love that. They love it when we give free services and also when we give free products and when we teach people how to wear makeup. And that's what the money goes towards. So we ran out of money. We ran out of steam. We need that money in order to move forward. So please, if you can spare $5, $10, whatever it is, we need to get organized. So, and also my question to you was, who sponsored this bill? And if you go back in 2015, are you going to get them to sponsor it again, or have you gone that far?
It was the original person actually had just some political connections, because it was something the moment I got on the board we were working on. So I don't know. I think she's a little bit burned. I think she's like, she put a lot of her own personal funds in it because she's just very passionate about the industry. And I think that in order to move forward, there would have to be some proof that she wouldn't be funding it probably all on her own. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Linnell needs help. I mean, we all need to pitch in, not